people that are in other meetings, and that I got this thrown on us, so I'm going to make sure we kind of move this around a little bit. Before we get started, I had gotten the figures in for December. We had 6 overdose deaths. We had 6 suicides. That number is the lowest we've had in 4 years. So we're doing some things are starting to look good. I'm excited about that. Still got a long ways to go, but I wanted to bring that up to you. Also, this is the last time for here on out to be on the agenda. We're going to have a report every steering on the Opioid Abatement Council committee. So I'm going to let every commissioner in here know what's going on with our committee on the distribution of funds from our lawsuit that we had gotten with a pharmaceutical company. Right now, we're looking at $550,000 a year for the next 18 years. So that's just one lawsuit, and there's others that are involved in there. And what I want to do is I want to take that money and help organizations in Rutherford County and to distribute that money to help the people that needs to be helped. And I'm going to not go in great detail, but it's the 3 things that we're focused on is awareness, education, and recovery. So those are the 3 things that this is going to be the infrastructure that we're looking at to develop with those ideas right there. All right, let's move on. First thing I want to do is call on Vice Chair Pettis-Reed, approve the minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I have reviewed those minutes, and I do have a paper copy of those minutes. I know they are located on our iPads. I have looked at them. I haven't found any problems. Mr. Chairman, I move for their approval.
Have a motion, have a second.
Second.
Have a second. Commissioner Beverly. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let's move on. Rachel, please call roll call. And that's 6 months in a row that I've missed it, so if you're keeping count. 7.
Commissioner Cush.
Present.
Commissioner Beverly.
Here.
Commissioner McAdoo. Here. Commissioner Rather.
Here.
Commissioner Paul Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Reed.
Here.
Chairman Harris.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right. Let's move on to number 2. Confirm Linebaugh and Stones River Regional Library Board vacancy. We have 2 people. One is Cody York, and the other one is Ellen Merrick. Is Miss Merrick here? Is Cody here? Cody, come up and introduce yourselves to everybody.
Library and Archives very closely. Even went to D.C. as public policy advisor for the Secretary of State and lobbied Congress on library issues alongside the Secretary of State and the State Library and Archivist, Chuck Sherrill. Got to know Chuck very well. He actually wrote me a letter of recommendation that I'll hand everybody on my way out. But yeah, so hopefully I can have something to offer the library and the library board, particularly when it comes to IT. Technology is an important piece of education and teaching and delivering services to the people who need it. So yeah, I'll be happy to, I don't know what the protocol is. If there's any questions, anything like that?
Anybody have any questions for Mr. York? Commissioner Cush?
Thank you, Chair. Cody, I'm looking at, I think, page 2 of your application. So you worked, if I'm reading this correctly, you worked for 10 years as Tennessee State Library and Archives, right?
No, I worked with Chuck Sherrill for 10 years. So I was the Director of Publications for 10 years.
Okay.
With the Secretary of State's office. I was Public Policy Advisor for 1 year prior to that, and I was the Assistant Director of Publications for a year prior to
Gotcha.
that.
Okay.
And
Thank
then and in that duty, I worked closely with the Library and Archives for over 10 years.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Phillips?
Cody, can you teach me how to put all of these words in those lines to where I can fill out forms as neat as you did?
Yes, sir, I can.
All right, we got two people. We have Miss Ellen Merrick and we have Cody York. We are voting for one. So we're going to have Rachel call roll call, and you just vote on who we got. We're looking for one person.
Commissioner Reed,
Cody York.
Commissioner Paul Johnson,
Cody York.
Commissioner Rather, Commissioner McAdoo, Commissioner Beverly,
Cody York.
Commissioner Cush,
Mr. York.
Chairman Harris.
Mr. York. Congratulations, Cody. All right, let's move on. Next on is to confirm a judicial commissioner appointment. We have 3 judges that are sending me a request. It's Judge Bennett and Judge Ishod. And are you Mr. Seal?
I'm Mr. Flatt.
Oh,
I'm
Jacob.
the Senior Judicial
Sorry.
Commissioner. Good evening.
All right.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, Commissioners. Here on behalf of Connor Seal, he's a new Judicial Commissioner. Hired him November 28th, and I personally interviewed him, trained him, and he's doing a fantastic job so far. I think he has the requisite skill and aptitude to make a good Judicial Commissioner.
Any questions? Ms. Flatt, if they can get here, please, we'd like to meet them. That's one of the things I want to do. I appreciate you coming. It's all right. We just as a committee like to see.
Sure, absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All those in favor of confirming Mr. Seal, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let's move on.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to move things around here. Let's go to number 6, absenteeism on committees and boards. We do not have all the material that we need for me to present this to you, so I don't want to bring that up. I want to defer that till next month. I'm looking for a motion to defer this.
Second.
Commissioner Cush, Commissioner Beverly, all those in favor say aye. All right. The one thing that we do, since Nick wanted to talk on some stuff that we brought up, is concerning the PBA. So Nick, I'll recognize you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is pertaining to the discussion that this committee's been having for the last couple months about certain issues with the PBA membership and retaining members, or rather the lack thereof, trying to get members to come to the meetings, to have quorum and to actually meet. I've spoken with counsel for the PBA. We've researched the item. We think that it can be resolved by the PBA amending their bylaws. That would not require any action by this committee nor the commission, as they are a separate nonprofit entity. So I understand that their counsel will be working with the PBA and bringing this up at a soon PBA meeting, maybe this week, about proposing to them the issues that this committee has identified and seeing if the PBA would be agreeable to amending their bylaws to provide an absentee policy. I don't know exactly what that looked like, so I'm paraphrasing, but something like if there are 3 consecutive unexcused absences, that the person that is at issue would have an automatic vacating of the seat. They'd have to be resign, and the seat would be open for filling by the county. So we think that that's a okay route to go, as opposed to private act or any other type of deal. So we'll see how that discussion goes, and as it moves along, I can report back to the committee.
Sounds good. Any questions on this? Everybody good? All right, let's move on. I'm going to go to number 7, Juvenile Detention Report. Mayor Carr, you recognize.
Thank you, sir. The last Juvenile Detention Center meeting was, Juvenile Detention Committee meeting was like the others, where the committee is still involved reviewing the SOP, which is Standard Operating Procedure. And so we have moved to a place where we're going to probably spend a lot more time going through those manuals. The board, in an effort for the board to understand the policies, the particular policies and the procedures there. I think the general tone and temperament, Mr. Chairman, of the board, if I could characterize it, would be that there is support for the Juvenile Detention Center and specifically the leadership there. And so I think what the board and the membership is trying to do is just better understand its role in light of the settlement of the lawsuit, in light of the requirements the federal government imposed on the Juvenile Detention Center, and then the response of this particular body and how to reconcile all those particular factors. So I'm encouraged by what's how we're moving forward, but at the same time, I'm excited about what this particular body, this particular committee has seen to the Tennessee General Assembly in the way of additional resources on that particular board, so we can move in a more expedited manner. And I'll be glad to take questions if that's okay.
So are you going to be able to have the SOP finished within the next 6 months?
I would certainly hope so. I really would, because at that point, yeah, I would be disappointed, Commissioner, if we did not. Yes, sir.
All right. Is there any questions for Mayor Carr? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to 8. This is a noise reduction discussion. This was brought to me by Chairman P., and he has been in contact. You will meet Mr. Curtis, who's with CTAS, and also the Doug DeMossi and Sheriff Fitzhugh. So I'm going to bring up Chairman P. Come on up, and I'm going to let you go from here. Keep your cussing to a minimum.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have, as you commissioners know, will occasionally get people complaining about noise. And it's a big headache for our sheriff. It's a big headache for our codes department. It's a headache for planning. And we've actually got a noise ordinance out there, but we've basically found out that it's virtually unenforceable. And then when we do find something and finally get it to the court, it'll usually get thrown out on some kind of technicality. So we've been trying to come up with something. Anyway, in desperation, whenever I have a problem, I tend to call Charlie Curtis. And Charlie's actually with Tennessee County Commissioners Association. And a lot of you will recognize him from having seen him over the years. But anyway, I wanted to invite him to come talk to us. We've also got a regional person out of CTAS. I think it's Mr. Robinson, Wesley Robinson. He's attending a funeral, so he wasn't able to attend tonight. Charlie said he would come in and cover for us. Anyway, Charlie, if you want to, head on up this way and let him get into it and basically explain the options that we've got, and we'll go from there. Thank you, Charlie.
Chairman, Mayor, members, Robert called me about this several weeks ago. This happens to be one of these pieces of legislation I happen to carry. Unfortunately, it needs a little tweaking, I guess. But the County Powers Act, which we referred to it as the nuisance law when we was carrying it through the legislature. It passed in 2006. And cities, by ordinance, can do a lot of things that you can't do. You got to do a private act. And so this is a general law of local application. You adopt it by 2/3, and it applies to your county. I'm thinking you may have already passed this County Powers Act. I may be wrong, but I heard someplace that it had been. But it gives you the ability to regulate nuisances. You got to define it. And you got to think your resolution out when you do it. We've got one AG's opinion. Blount County passed this several years ago, but they weren't using it on noise. And they got an AG's opinion, and the AG won't know who was going to enforce it. And I'm sure that's why the sheriff's sitting here tonight. But the Attorney General at that time, I think it was Cooper, he opined that the law was vague and it hadn't really dictated who would do it. But we've got in general law that if a city is small and they don't have their own law enforcement, they can put in their ordinance that the sheriff will enforce their ordinances. If somebody's not abiding it, the sheriff can actually enforce that. This particular section of code is 5-1-118 through 123, deals with these nuisances. 123 states that everything will be taken to the General Sessions Court or a court within the county that handles General Sessions workload. So some counties have got an option to more than one avenue. I think that I'm going to talk to the chairman of the local government committee and the chairman of the Senate local government committee and see if they'll carry legislation this time and define the framework exactly how it would be enforced. And it'd be bad if the sheriff's wasting his time to get to court. We don't have any case where the sheriff's taken something where a county's passed this law and a judge has set it aside. There's no case law saying it won't work. But the CTAS attorneys are saying it needs to be tweaked a little. But it gives you the ability to do a multitude of things. You just got to decide what it is you want to do. But it's the same thing a city. I also talked to TML today, the Municipal League, and I asked them to get me the 2 or 3 ordinances from cities that they think are really doing a good job on noise. Now, I understand from talking to Robert, you don't want to get into using a meter. You just want to get somebody who's disturbing the peace during a certain period of time. So I think you can draft your resolution to that. It's just going to depend on your county attorney, and he would have the ability to work with CTAS attorneys. They've dealt with this in other areas of the state and get the language like you want it. But I'll be glad to answer any questions, if anybody's got any. There's no question the law's there for you to use. You just got to decide how you're going to do it.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes, sir.
Good to see you again.
I've heard of you.
I heard of you too. For those who don't know, Representative Curtis and I served in the Tennessee General Assembly together. And I can tell you I didn't have a better teacher than you, Charlie. Thank you for your service.
You're a good man. I appreciate you.
Can you repeat that last part into the microphone? Put that in the microphone.
You're a good man, and I appreciate your service. We worked well together. He chewed me out when he thought I needed it, but we did work well.
I only did that one time, and I learned my lesson. Charlie, the question I have is, if this is just disturbing the peace, and that's the kind of the way we would go, then that seems to be somewhat of a subjective thing. How does law enforcement then enforce disturbing the peace? Because what could be disturbing to me, the peace to Commissioner Johnson may not be to Commissioner Reed. So how do we deal with that enforcement when it could be subjective like that?
That's the reason I asked TML to come up with some ordinances that some cities have, so we can see how the city's been doing this for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no need
Curtis, speaking to your microphone.
There's not any need in us reinventing the wheel. If a city's got a good ordinance, all you got to do is replicate what they're doing. So
you're telling this body that there are sufficient ordinances out there with regard to enforcement relating to disturbing the peace?
I think so, yes, sir.
Okay.
You can't use the word reasonable.
No.
Just like you just pointed out. I don't think reasonable should ever be in the Tennessee code, but it is. But what's reasonable to one person is unreasonable to someone else. It's got to be something you can measure. And you've got some good minds here. You're just going to think things out. You got plenty of support.
Has CTAS been able to identify those municipalities that have effectively written ordinances that provide for adequate enforcement so that it takes that subjectivity out of the equation?
Well, MTAS is the one that deals with cities. I didn't even contact
My apologies.
MTAS.
Yes, sir.
I contacted the Municipal League. They're my landlord. They're right down the hall from me, so I just walked in there and talked to one of their attorneys, and they said they would get me some ordinances that they felt would be a good model.
Thank you, sir.
So it may take me a few days, but I will have those.
Great. Thank you.
Any questions? I have a couple.
Yes, sir.
So how, if we have a partnership with the city of Murfreesboro who has ordinances, how does this process go? I understand that you're telling us we have the ability to do something. How would we go forward? What steps does this committee need to do to go forward?
Well, ultimately, you'd want to make a recommendation to the county commission. You'll have to check with the county clerk. I don't know if you've adopted the County Powers Act or not. If you haven't, you need to adopt it. And then you can do it's bits and pieces. You can do it as you need. If you want to deal with just noise problems, noise issues, then that's the only avenue you need to deal. But you need to get where the law applies to your county. I'm not so sure you couldn't come up with some kind of mutual aid agreement between you and the city, where the city would take care of your issues when you got some of y'all on the commission will live in the city and your constituencies in the city. Some of you may be in the city and out. But the biggest thing, those people outside the corporate city limits, that's going to have to come through your sheriff's department. I think it's the most logical way for you to do that. If he cites somebody and they got to go to court, that's somebody that's not on the road again. You just got to think all that out.
Well, I know the reason, one of the things that concerns me on this is in Public Works, we adopted fines for litter. But our enforcement on that is lacking. So, I mean, it's nothing against anybody. It's just that, we had a judge come in and say, what really can she do? So I see this as a possibility. And I have one more question, and I know I want to get this out there too. Mayor is, this committee has authorized the mayor to hire a lobbyist firm to look into getting rid of the County Powers Act. So my question to you is there, in the County Powers Act, is there parts you can take out and parts you can add to that?
Sure, it can be amended. This particular law we're talking about is not the one the mayor's after. There's another section. I carried it too, or I carried parts of it, but it's in another section of the code, and it deals with developmental tax. And that's the part that he wants to do away with.
We can do that. We can take parts of this and amend it.
Sure.
Okay.
You can't, but the legislature can.
But through a resolution through the county commission.
Yeah, I mean, you can request the legislature to repeal something, but it's up to the legislature to do that. You've got some good representatives and senators here. You'd go through them. But on this particular thing, the section of code I'm talking about tonight is not what the mayor's upset about, but it's also called County Powers Act. It's part of the County Powers Act. It's just a different section. This is dealing with nuisances, things that you want to be able to control, that the city control, but typically a county can't. So this bill passed in 2006 to give the counties the ability to regulate things like cities do. And this particular one, Chairman P wants to deal with sound or noise, and you're just going to tailor your resolution to that. The one thing I didn't mention, the law also says you can have up to a $500 fine, but there's a Supreme Court case that, I'm not an attorney, I'm just telling you, I talked to an attorney today and they told me there's a Supreme Court case that $50, this particular thing we're talking about is civil, and if they don't have a jury trial, $50 is it, but it can be $50 per day. So it can, but I don't think you're doing this to raise money. You're doing this to where people can sleep nights. That's what you're hoping to do.
Any more questions? Thank you, Mr. Curtis.
Thank you.
Commissioner P.
I also have been talking to Nick, our attorney, and part of the legislation Charlie's been talking about, the County Powers Act, for us to be able to write or to do an ordinance like the cities do, we have to pass that particular part of the County Powers Act. Now, much to my surprise, in talking to Nick, we not only passed it once, we passed it twice, but I'll let him elaborate on that. But once we do that, which we've done, I was going to ask you to do that tonight and pass it to the full commission, but since it's already been done, we do not have to go to the state legislature to write these ordinances. You know, before, you know, to get basically a local text or something like, excuse me, I'm missing the words that I need. But anyway, to do anything like this in the past, we'd have had to go to the state legislature to get a private act, finally spit it out. But once we pass this, which we already have, we can do that on our own without having to go to the legislature. But anyway, Nick, if you want to give us your take on that, I know you and I had quite a bit of discussion on it.
Happy to, and I hope I don't muddy up the waters at all. Hope it's just clarifying, if anything. And Mr. Curtis, I'd like to get your email address if I could, because if you've been in contact with some of the MTAS people, it might be instrumental in assisting me help this committee make a decision on what it can do to better its way forward on this deal. So Commissioner P's correct. The noise ordinance idea has been floating around the county for a long time, and as Commissioner P stated, we in fact already have a noise ordinance, and it was passed shortly after this the commission adopted the County Powers Act. So we have already done that, which gives us the authority to pass local laws to govern and abate nuisances, one of which would be sound. So we've got the ability to do it. I think everybody's clear on that. What Commissioner P explained, I think, is also true, and what your codes people would probably attest to is the enforceability of our current noise ordinance is difficult. It's based on decibel reading and levels. And similar to what you see with criminal law enforcement and speeding tickets that have a radar gun, which, you know, you got to have somebody stationed there when it happens. They have to be an eyewitness to it. The radar calibration has to be set in a certain way. Criminal defense attorneys can get up and argue that it wasn't calibrated recently, it's not up to the right model, and it couldn't have accurately, you know, figured out what the speed was. We've got those same issues here with the decibel reading level. You also have a practical idea of Miss Bell going out to a house party at 11:30 at night and trying to have a meter out there and seeing if she can get it to read over a certain decibel level. So if there's a way to better construct the ordinance to give a little bit more teeth to it, I'm happy to assist in seeing if we can get that to happen. One thing that the mayor brought up that I think is totally correct too is you want to stay away as far as you can from subjectivity, because any local ordinance or resolution can be subject to constitutional attack if it's vague or if it doesn't give notice to an offender of what they can be in trouble for. So the contours of the ordinance need to be pretty clear, and hopefully these examples from other cities might help guide us in that event. And I guess some of the last points I want to make is the real issue here is enforcement and how you go about, even if you have a very well-written noise ordinance, how does the county go about enforcing it against offenders? Part of the issue, and Mr. Curtis raised this, and I'd like to know further his thoughts, not tonight, but whenever, sir, we talk, is any amendments to the state law that better identifies how that can occur, because this is a civil regulation. The county is not creating its own new crime. We can't do that. The crimes can only be created by the state legislature and applicable to all Tennessee residents, right? But we can define civil nuisance laws and assess fines here. Now, the question that I'm going to look into, and that Mr. Curtis might have thoughts on too, is the ability of our law enforcement to issue citations for local regulations that are civil in nature. Cities can do this. They do this. You know, the city of Laverne and the city of Murfreesboro have their own local ordinances that, for example, careless driving. There's an ordinance, I imagine, in one of those cities, and it's listed on a citation that MPD officers carry around, and they cite the offender when they've pulled them over, and you've got to go to city court, and there's a $50 fine plus court costs. I'm not aware currently of a law that would allow our sheriff to do that, but maybe there's a way to accomplish that. And I guess the last thing, just so everybody knows, and you've touched on this, sir, is the statutes over this stuff, the County Powers Act, it does say that a fine can be assessed for a violation of it up to $500. But he alluded to it, there is a Tennessee Supreme Court case that calls that into question because the Tennessee Constitution says that no fine can be assessed against any person above $50 unless a jury is impaneled. And if your General Sessions Court is the one that has jurisdiction over the enforcement of these civil laws, there's not a jury in Judge Gillies or Judge Isod or any of those court. There's not a jury at that level. It's only at the next level above. So those are some of the issues, and I guess the last issue is going to be once, even if law enforcement can cite, or if it's still an administrative official like Ms. Bell or somebody else that cites the person, they've got to come to court. And generally you need somebody on behalf of the county, an attorney, a county attorney, or whatever, to prosecute it, to move forward with it. And it's not a criminal citation, so the DA is probably not going to be interested in doing it. So we already kind of do this, just so you all probably recognize, we already kind of do this with our local dog regulations. For the when a dog gets out and is running at large and bites somebody, we have a set of local regulations where we file General Sessions lawsuit. My office handles that to pursue those offenders, and they have restrictions that are placed upon them, and fines can be assessed. So it's kind of the same sort of model of thinking.
On the sheriff, I didn't mention it while I was speaking earlier, but under Tennessee Code 8-8-201, gives the duty of the sheriff to enforce the ordinances of municipality, provided that the municipality has expressed by ordinance its intent to have the sheriff enforce its ordinances. So it's already in Tennessee Code for the sheriff to be able to do city's ordinances. To me, it's a no-brainer. If he can do it for a city, he can do it for county, but the CTAS attorneys think we need to tweak the law.
I don't disagree with that, and
Yeah.
so if that's something that can happen to give everybody rest assured that the county's not going to get sued when our sheriff has gone off, and because the county attorney has said he can go cite everybody, and we want to be sure that it's right. Also, too, one thing to keep in mind is it may be that if we accomplish all this, that we're only dealing with the unincorporated areas of the county. I'm not so sure that I don't think that we can pass a law, and then if somebody's having a house party in downtown Murfreesboro, that the sheriff's deputy who's on patrol going back to the jail hears that he can go and cite them for a violation of the local county ordinance. Don't think we can do that. Maybe we can. If we can, let's do it, right? But just a thought.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's case law. The sheriff can do it, but as a general rule, they don't. If they got good law enforcement in the city, that lets the sheriff devote more of their time somewhere else. But if the sheriff knows that they're not enforcing the law the way it should be, the sheriff's got the authority to put his foot down. But that's a case-by-case basis. I won't hold you up. I appreciate your time, Mr. Chairman.
Always. You're welcome anytime.
I'm working for y'all.
Okay, I'm going to go through Robert. Robert,
Well,
take it from there.
I don't want Charlie to run off till we get all our questions answered. We still got some, and I was going to ask Sheriff Fitzhugh he's been talking to his folks with CTAS, and if you'd like to come up and speak, please do.
Come on up, Sheriff. I guess, Sheriff, the thing I'm kind of confused at is he just quoted state law, and we already voted on this. We already have the County Powers Act. We already have the nuisance law. So I guess the question comes down to how we enforce it. So, Sheriff, I guess I am curious as to see what you say about all this. So go ahead.
Well, I don't want to step on anybody's parade, but I'm in disagreement that it is a situation where the city says, hey, I've got an ordinance, and Sheriff, I want you to enforce it. There's a little bit more to it than that, and it's not that simple. County Sheriff's Department to enforce municipal ordinances, the County Sheriff's Department, whichever county shall enforce the municipal ordinance of the city, town, according to the terms of agreement. So there's got to be an agreement entered into by the sheriff, by the county, and by the General Sessions judge as to whether this is going to happen or not. It's not just, hey, I want you to enforce ordinances, and we start coming into the city and enforcing ordinances. There's a whole lot more to it than that. So that's number one. Number two, we've been talking, of course, we can go back and forth, and I know we get several opinions. I agree with what Nick was saying here. it's a $50 fine. If you go out on a noise ordinance, what is offensive to you may not be offensive to me. So then you don't have any decimal levels or anything set. So I, as a deputy, it's not offensive to me, so I'm not going to write you. Another deputy comes along and says, it's offensive to me and I'm going to write you. Well, I'm telling you what's going to happen when you start doing this. It's going to get thrown out to court. It's never going to get anywhere. The other problem I've got with it is probably the majority of these are going to happen at night. I mean, it's very rarely you're going to have this during the daytime. For a $50 fine, somebody wants to go to court and says, I've got to take a deputy who has worked at night, bring him into court, pay him time and a half. I've got to have a city attorney, because this is not going to be represented by the district attorney's office because it's a civil matter. So you're going to have an attorney who's not going to do this for free. Then you're going to have to pay them to go up there and represent the county in this matter. So you've got an attorney we're paying, you've got a deputy paying time and a half to come in for a $50 fee. At what cost do we want to do this? The other situation we do have a law in the code book, 3917-305, which covers offenses against public health, safety, and welfare, which we do enforce, and it's called disorderly conduct. One of the sections of that, a person who violates this section who makes unreasonable noise that prevents others from carrying on lawful activities. We had 1,250 last year calls to us concerning a disturbing of the peace or whatever. We wrote a citation, which is a C misdemeanor, on 24% of those cases. So we did cite people into court on this. So we already really have a law to do this, which is a criminal law, which we can enforce. And we do enforce it. If we get a noise complaint, we don't run out there and cite them the first time. We run out there, and if we find it to be an offensive to others' lawful activity, then we ask them to cease. And then if we have to come back, that's when we get into the citation part of it. So even if we had an ordinance that said, hey, noise, we're not going to cite them the first time we run out there. We're going to ask them to cease the activity if we find it offensive, and then we're going to go our way. If we have to come back, then we would get into this. I mean, I understand what we're trying to do on this, but it's very problematic when you're asking a sheriff's office, which is based on criminal law, to start trying to enforce civil law. We run into some real problems on that. I'm not going to speak for the judges. I wouldn't dare do that. Every time I do that, I get in trouble. So I'm not going to do that. But I think this is something that it's going to take us, it's going to take the commission, it's going to take a general sessions judges actually, because we're going to have to deal with more than one, if we want to consider this. To go into a decimal readings, then for us to do that, you as a commission are going to have to buy us some equipment. And I'm looking at probably about 150 of these devices, so we can put them in our cars to measure decibel levels. It's not something I really want to get into. I think we've got a law that's in place that allows us to do what we need to do. And like I said, we do cite, and we have cited on 24% of the cases that we've gone out on. And we do bring them into court, and they face a fine plus court cost and so forth. So that's kind of where I am with it. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any questions for the sheriff? Go ahead, Commissioner Rather.
So, based on what you've read, what we're trying to do is reinvent a wheel that already is rolling pretty good. Is that fair to say?
That's my opinion, and I'll state it as that's my opinion. I think we've got a law in place that's fairly broad, that allows us to do what it is that the commissioners are asking us to do. To do what we're proposing, I think we are reinventing the wheel, and actually we're actually adding spokes to a wheel, and we're going to have to get a lot of people to agree on how we're going to go about this. I really think we're getting into a woolly booger. I mean, honestly, that's my opinion.
I had one question, and I'm just curious. I don't know the answer. So if it's a disturbance of the peace, wouldn't that have to be intent for you to, it doesn't, okay.
A party, loud noise party is not really intent. It's just people being loud. So there's no intent there for them to come out and intentionally say, we're going to have a party and we're intentionally going to disturb the neighbors. So there is no intent on something.
And the reason I'm bringing that up is if you went out there on a call and it's a party, I mean, it's basically you're just going to say, hey, shut it down, or quiet it.
What we do, we ask to quiet it down. I'm going to go back to my patrol days. We asked to quiet it down if we came back. We might have given them another warning. If we came back again, we actually probably went broader than we should, but we shut the party down and said, you're going to have to shut it down. If they persisted or we got some lip, then they were cited. We try everything we can do to avoid going to court with it, but if it's a last resort in which they want to push it, then we'll cite and bring you into court, and we'll let the judge decide the matter. So.
Okay. Any questions? None? Go ahead. Are you good, Charlie?
Yeah, I'm good.
Good?
The one thing I want to make everybody understand, this law we're talking about tonight, it wasn't designed for a noise ordinance. It was designed for anything that the county legislative body decided was a nuisance that they want to be able to control. It just happened to be something that Chairman P. approached me. I told him that's the only vehicle I knew if they want to do something and tailor it. But don't hesitate to call me if I can help any.
I got a couple questions.
All right, go right ahead.
Number one is, how many counties right now have adopted the County Powers Act?
I couldn't honestly tell you. That's not something I track. I could put out an email and find out. But several have utilized it for sure.
Okay, and what is, in your professional expert opinion, is the chances of the County's Powers Act to be repealed?
Not real good.
Okay.
Because there's counties using it, and they're going to object to it if it's been repealed. Now, what the mayor's objecting to, he don't like the way there's another section of County Powers Act in another part of the code that allows counties to charge up to $1 a square foot on development, residential development, to help offset the cost of providing services. He would like for it to be higher than that, and he would like to repeal it. I think it probably needs to be amended, but I doubt that the legislature would repeal it. But it does need amending.
Well, the reason I'm bringing that up is there's some people in this room that has worked hard because we feel like that our impact fees are very low. Right. And so we changed over to $1 per square foot. But I remember when we were trying to do that, it was tough just to simply do that. So I'm just wondering how hard it would be, because we are not charging enough. We're not doing nowhere near what we got to do for this to sustain this growth. So I'm just curious, as somebody who's dealing with it all the time, if this is something that we should either get excited about or not get excited about.
No, I carried that bill too, and at the time we did it, counties were coming to the legislature and asking for a private act, and usually it was $1 a square foot. Well, we decided we'll make it easier for counties to do that. So we had this bill drafted, and if a county was experiencing a certain amount of growth, they could just adopt by 2/3 vote and go to $1 a square foot. Now, years after that, now we can see that you could build a good high school for $35 million 20 years ago. You're talking $150 million now. Well, that dollar a square foot's not getting it. Every time you get about 600 new houses in your county, you got to build a new school. So the math just doesn't work. That's not going to, your impact fee's never going to pay for what all you got to do, but you got to offset some of your costs. I'm not going to name the county just to keep from somebody being crucified, but one county not far from here, the average house in that county right now in fees are paying over $30,000 just in fees, and they're growing by leaps and bounds. But they got 3 private acts that allows them to come at development in 3 different ways. But $1 a square foot's nothing. It's not adequate.
No, it's nowhere.
The mayor's correct. It's not adequate. But I think there's a good chance the legislature will amend it and make it. I'm not telling you. I don't know what the figure will be. It may be $4 or $5 a foot. It might be 8 or 9. I don't know. But I think $1 is not adequate. But I'm no longer in the legislature. I'm what's called a has-been.
Well, I think there's 2 or 3 of us in here would love to have a conversation with you anytime about this.
Oh, you call me anytime you want.
Yeah. Maybe the mayor should be contacting you instead of other people.
Well, he contacted me before he talked to y'all about the lobbyist deal. He won't know my opinion. But you're in a precarious situation here. If you can correct your impact fees, the quicker you do it, the quicker it's going to start helping all the taxpayers in this county. Mm-hmm. And the longer it takes you to do it, the longer it's going to take if you start impacting people in a positive way. I don't think you're going to stop development, but you're going to help the people that's causing the pressure to be put on your services, help contribute to the cause.
Thank you, Charlie.
You're welcome. Y'all have a wonderful evening.
Commissioner P.
Well, let me just. The reason I asked Charlie to come, and also our codes director, planning, of course our sheriff, I'm kind of like William Penn. Let me say this first, is the government that governs best governs least. I'm not running around wanting to add a bunch of laws or ordinances, things like that, but this is a problem. This noise is a problem. Some of you new commissioners probably hadn't had any calls, or you will get some, I promise you, if you hadn't already. But what I'd like to ask the chairman to do is to maybe put a study group together, let us put our heads together with our planning director, our sheriff, our codes director, and also I'm not afraid to go over and talk to our judges. Matter of fact, I feel like I'm on pretty good basis, first name basis with most of them, and I'd like their input too. But I think that we can tweak this, since we've got the authority to do it already, so that we can get something that's easier to enforce. And one thing that, Charlie, I don't know if it went over your head, I had to hear it 3 or 4 times before it really hit home to me. This being civil and the fine being $50, there is no requirement for a person to have a jury trial. That's my understanding. Well, that's, if we said, let's just throw out an example. I've looked at several different sound ordinances around. One in Franklin, for instance, is a time. Let's say it's from 7 to 10. Everything's fine. After 10 o'clock at night till 7 a.m. is quiet time. Basically, you get a complaint. Whoever's the enforcement agent, whether it's a sheriff's deputy or whoever, they pull up and say, hey, it's 10:05, it's quiet time. I'm giving you a warning. Please, knock it off and leave. And I'm not wanting to bash anybody. I'm not wanting money. I just want to keep the peace there. And of course, the sheriff has got ways of doing that too. And that sounds kind of like what he's doing. But as Nick mentioned, doing this with a gun and that has to be calibrated, has to go to court. If you get into court and the time that you're spending with these people, with an ordinance like I envision, it's basically cut and dried. If it's past 10 o'clock to 7 a.m. and it's clearly disturbing the peace to somebody, who's the enforcement person, you're going to get a ticket. after, say, your first time. And then, if it's the next night, the next night, the next night, it would be cumulative. That's basically the way it is now, I understand. But I think it bears looking at. I'd like to ask this committee, to form either a study committee where we can get together and sit down and say, hey, what would be a good way to do this? And Charlie's going to send us some ordinances, and I think Nick's got a couple he's looked at, and maybe some more of us, but I think it would help us to come up with something. And after we sit down and look at it and get all these stakeholders in there, including our judges, maybe the district attorney, I'd like to talk to all of them about it. And hopefully we can come up with something that'll help our citizens. I've got problems like part of my district is this side's city, this side's county. I've got a little bar right outside the city limits across the road. And 3 a.m. in the morning, they'll roll out with their amps and guitars and drums and start hitting it hard. Well, right across the streets, a bunch of condos and apartments, and they're waking them all up at 3 a.m. in the morning. So that's the kind of problems that I'm trying to address, just so you know. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your time.
Any questions? Commissioner Phillips.
I've lived in the city. I lived on Greenland Drive for about 37 years. The entrance to MTSU, students coming down Greenland Drive with radios blasting, sirens blasting all day, time of the days and nights. You got football games going on. You got the livestock pavilion going on anytime, all the time. Those type of things are not exclusive to the city any longer. There's industrial development that's happening out in the county. There's commercial development that's happening out in the county. There are restaurants being built out in the county. I think the sheriff said it exactly right. We've got something in place, and to try to put something else in place that we're not going to be able to enforce, Alan, you remember we've talked about this 20 years ago. We talked about litter control 20 years ago. All of it sounds good, but there's no way to control it. How do you stop someone from having loud mufflers that's waking you up at 3 o'clock in the morning? Those type of things are not enforceable. Even though they're a nuisance, they're not enforceable. You talk about second and third shift commercial development, industrial development that's going on out of the county, the beeps that happen when 18-wheelers back up. Those are the type of things that are going to continue to happen on a regular basis out in the county because we are growing out in the county versus in the city because the cities are landlocked. Those type of things are going to happen more and more and more often. What do you do about it? What could I do about it when I'm in the city? What about football games that are happening, baseball games that are happening, and they go sometimes well beyond 10 o'clock? What are you going to do about all that kind of stuff? You can put together all kinds of study committees that you want to, but you're not going to come up with anything that's going to solve that problem. It is a growth problem just like all the other types of things that we have. And you can put all types of studies together. We've looked at it in the past. We've come up with rules. We've come up with regulations, and it's not enforceable. And I'd whole lots rather for our law enforcement to be out looking for drunk drivers and looking for lawbreakers. If you've got someone that's a nuisance, I think you can turn that in and it can be enforceable, just like the restaurant that he was talking about. I think those are the type of things that you can do. But when you get a loud party that's in a neighborhood, when somebody goes a little bit over, you're the neighbor, you go over and tell them to shut up, or you're going to call the police. That usually solves the problem. Usually. It's happened to me, and I think it's probably happened to everyone here. I've got a concern, and I'm not a member of this committee, and I probably shouldn't be rattling on like this, but I've got a concern about us trying to put something together that we've done in the past that's not enforceable and wasting time doing those kinds of things. When we've got something in place, that nuisance ordinance right now, I think that's what we ought to be concentrating on.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, let's move on. Gentlemen, we're going to go to your litigation. You have it on your iPad. Is there any questions on the litigation list? Seeing none?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman,
Go
I
ahead.
do have one. Number 10, with the pro se.
On sheriffs or the
I'm sorry, the county general.
county general?
How soon do you anticipate us getting out of that?
Some of you might be very happy that Mr. President Biden's being sued. Some of you maybe not, but he is a named defendant in that suit, along with many other officials. These happen from time to time. Sovereign citizens, I don't know if you all know much about them, but they have a mission to clog up government and court systems. And so this was filed against President Biden amongst many other state and local officials, one of which just so happened to be our court clerk. So we filed a motion to dismiss that. It's set to be heard at the end of this month. We're hopeful that the judge will see what the suit is really, it's meritless, and will hopefully dismiss
So
it.
this is actually legit?
It is a lawsuit that has been filed.
Wow. Andrew Johnson. All right. Any questions?
I just want to make a statement. If you ever run across a sovereign citizen, walk away quickly. It's very dangerous.
All right, let me, I want to follow up on what Chairman Phillips says. I agree with you 100%. I mean, the sheriff, we ask a lot of him, and I don't see where we're at as far as adding on to more stuff. I think, Commissioner P has got concerns in his district. He's responsible for his district. He's speaking for his district, and we all have to respect that and understand that he's, motivated to do something on that. However, Chairman P, I see there's a lot of things that could just add up into this, like a muffler or some kid, with the dual exhaust. I can see a whole lot of things. So I really don't know how to go forward on this, Mr. Chairman. I feel like the best way, if we want to proceed with this, is to go through public safety because of the sheriff's department, and then I think if there's anything comes up, it come back to us. But I basically don't see anything as far as what we can do that we're not already done. But you're more than welcome. You're welcome here anytime you want to speak on this matter. It's open to you, and I thank you for your concern. I want you to know that. All right, last on our list, gentlemen, is our HR report. Ms. Stevenson? David.
Evening. I hope everyone had a happy New Year celebration. I've given each of you a copy of the report, and one of the things that I want to tell you about this, as we move forward, you'll know, it's very hard for me to give you end of the month, prior month information that is complete when we meet the first of the month. So all the things haven't come in. I just want to let you know, if you ever look at these and you notice, well, like, those numbers were different last month than they are now, I want you to know why they're different, because sometimes all the bills haven't come in or all the processes that haven't come in. So I did want to make sure that I pointed that out in case that was, nobody's ever asked that question, but we were talking about it as a team today in my office, and that was one of the things I wanted to let you know. So what will happen next month is I will just give you totals for the year 2022 for the things that I'm outlining as of right now. The first column on your sheet is the year-to-date. That gives you the numbers that's cumulative as of December 28th, I believe, is what we went up to on these. For the month of December, ADA, the biggest thing that we had was the interactive process with those individuals who have an FMLA that maybe they need to be extended, and we need to see how we can accommodate them to get them back into the workplace. We had 4 of those. As far as personnel changes, we had 25 promotions. That was the most significant item in the personnel changes for the month of December. We didn't do any audits in the month of December. We're just trying to get year-end activities, and also we are ramping up for the budget process, which we have already started now in January, gathering information. Under the benefits, the biggest items were sick leave donations, and we did 4 applications for retirement. And for those of you who don't know what a sick leave donation is anyone who is on a qualified FMLA who has exhausted their own personal leave, that's sick and annual leave, and they need assistance from their coworkers. We do request on their behalf, and I will have to say that Rutherford County has some of the most generous employees. They don't want people to be out there not being able to pay their house payment, their car payment, and they almost always come through for those employees who need that assistance. Community involvement, the main things that we did during the month of December is the Christmas tree lighting event and those type things in the schools, Chamber of Commerce event. Those are the type of events that we did in December. For leave, we had 88 FMLAs in December. We had 13 cases of COVID, 12 military leaves, 6 extended leaves, 4 OJIs, and 4 personal leaves. And a personal leave is after someone has exhausted their FMLA, they can go for a personal leave of absence to extend that after they've exhausted it, if their departments can afford to let them be out additional time. Legal services, we had 9 different situations. Those could be anything from complaints to forms filled out for the federal government if they have a questionnaire, those type things. Offboarding, we had 17 exit interviews and 17 resignations during December. Onboarding, we had 92 salary evaluations completed, 30 new hires for the month of December. Policy changes, myself and Chief of Staff Eric Kennedy are reviewing the employee handbook, so we reviewed 25 policies so far into this, and we're trying to get these completed so we can bring those forth to steering. Promotional activities, we have 4 different promotional activities with various organizations who want to offer exclusive benefits to Rutherford County employees for the month of December. Recruitment, we received 280 applications. We submitted 106 declination letters. We had 25 job postings, and those are the main items that we had under recruitment. Reports and surveys. The biggest item that we have here is, as always, is our open records request. We had 236 of those for the month of December. We had 46 Title VI requests, 15 in our turnover reports, 13 background checks, and 30 different individuals for the new hire reporting. Under special projects, these are things that we do that are outside our normal day-to-day duties, whether it be something that the commission requests or something we're researching to bring forth to the commission. And we had 11 different requests for those different things for the month of December. Evaluation and testing, our number 1 item was physicals, and primarily because of our firefighters, those that will be coming on to assist with our new locations. Those are the biggest number of items are for those new recruits. Title VI, we had 46 requests for language interpreters, and 45 of those were Spanish. And the last category, wait, no, I've got one more category after that. Nope, this is the last category. Last category, we did 212, we trained 212 individuals in the month of December. Some of those topics were under business ethics, drug-free workplace, employee handbook, sexual harassment, supervisory training, and Title VI training. I've also added to your list the number of job openings that we have and what departments. How many applications is in the box to the side, just for each of those positions. It kind of tells you how many applications we're receiving. Some of these positions, it also has when the position was posted and when it's due to expire. I had another piece of, currently we have several of, whenever we do a job posting, we show the applications. It's also important to know that some of the departments are already actively interviewing, so the numbers will go up and down. What I say is a vacancy may be filled later. It may be in the pipeline waiting to be filled, and we just haven't received the documentation yet. So that's why sometimes my numbers will vary from a department. If the sheriff's office were to get up and give a report, our numbers may be different because the sheriff knows what positions they've already slotted to fill, and I haven't received that paperwork yet. So, are there any questions?
And go ahead, Commissioner Cush.
Sonia, in the rectangular box in the lower center of the page, the numbers on the far right, are those the number of days that has been posted, or are those number of applicants that have applied for that position?
Number of applicants.
Number of applicants. So,
Yes, sir.
for instance, item 1, the 911 operator, there's been 190 folks apply for that.
That is actually for the, we post some, I'll call them our sister agencies. They're not necessarily county departments, but we do assist them because they are smaller in nature. So that's like the E911. So we assist E911 with job postings, and some of the other departments, if they're smaller and they say, we don't really have a website to do this, can you post? So that's, yes, they have had a lot of interest in their position. So.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Commissioner Beverly.
In regard to the veterinarian, I see it's been open for almost 2 weeks now, no post. Do we tweak anything if a repost or?
So when we get to, we have a veterinarian currently. We were looking to hire another veterinarian to assist, so that, because as seems to be when the economy gets a little bit harder, people have a need for their pets and those type things, but we're also trying to offset to cross-train in the event of an absence of the veterinarian, obviously if the veterinarian went out. So to answer your question, there have been times when we have positions. Several years ago, we had a really difficult time. We needed an engineer. We didn't have an engineer. We posted it several times. We went to all the universities across, the Midwest. And we just had to make a decision to, outside of the budget cycle, to do a pay increase for that position, or we were not going to have an engineer. So when it gets to a certain point, we do have to evaluate. We've got a position in our IT department that we're having a hard time filling. We thought with the 15% increase, but the reality is when we did an increase, everybody else did an increase, and I don't know where that ends, and I'm sure when we get into the budget process, you will hear that come up again. But there's a couple of positions that we have just not had luck filling, so we may be coming forth at some point in time to the Budget Committee and saying, we've got to have the position, what do we do? So I hope that answers your question.
It did, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? I need a motion to approve her report. Commissioner Johnson, I need a second. Second, Commissioner Cush. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Is there any other business? Since there is none, we adjourn.